Hello, welcome to Understory. Today we're going to take a little bit of a look at the election, looking back and going forward. It's been an incredibly interesting few weeks leading up to the election and coming through it. What does it mean for Australia? What are the impacts on our society and our culture? So joining me today is Nick. And so we'll start, Nick, with looking back. And I want to get your reactions, your takeouts, because I know you're a thinking person. A lot of people have been trying to make sense of this, and that's really what we have to do. We have to try and make sense of this because it's really jarred a few people. So what were your takeouts?
On the whole, I must admit I wasn't surprised. I was disappointed. I would have liked a different result. I did not like the idea of Anthony Albanese being our Prime Minister, and that is what has eventuated.
But you weren't surprised?
But I wasn't surprised
Okay.
By the ways that the votes went. The only thing that perhaps did surprise me a little, I wasn't sure that the Teal candidates would be as successful as they were. I know there was a lot of money spent on their campaign, but I was a bit sceptical as to whether that would really catch any votes. But they were playing at that sort of political centre of gravity where the majority of the voters are.
Well, you mentioned the money, and what people need to understand, just going past that very first point, they're not Teal independents, they're really a Teal party. There was about 9 of them, I think. They spent a total of $12.5 million, so strip out $3.5 million for brand building, you then got $1 million per candidate. Now, most people spend $10, $20, $30, $40, $50, $60,000, the miners I'm talking about, if they're lucky. So these guys had $1 million each. They're not independents, they're a party.
No, it was a lot of money spent on them, and it was a strategic and ultimately successful way of winning some votes, essentially by attacking the Liberal Party from the left rather than from the right.
And a very clever move, very clever, very well choreographed.
Very clever, and I think, unfortunately, it kind of does tell us something about our country and about our culture, that that's where everyone's minds are at. It's easy to convince people that sort of way. It reflects the success of the media, I think, of having a fairly brainless and shallow conversation about so many important issues, so that people just swallow the rhetoric on what we are or what we could do about climate change, what we are and what we could do about health, and a lot of other. They picked all the divisive issues. They picked all the ones where you could attack Liberals from the centre, and they did it successfully.
You know what it made me think of? I'm old enough to remember the Coolabah cask. Where will you hide your Coolabah? If you remember the campaign, don't sing it. Then they went to the 2 litre cask, because the 4 litre, the 4 litre was a negative, like where will you hide? It was such a big and clunky thing. They turned it into a positive, the Mojo boys. So then they came up with a 2 litre thing, right? So it was a smaller box, it was a slightly better wine. That's what the Teals look like to me. They look like a 2 litre cask on greens. The greens, the greens are the clunky, mob green, radical, kind of environmental. But the Teals, even the word teal, it is a subtle.
Yeah, they were upmarket greens. You wouldn't feel embarrassed. You wouldn't worry that you were going to get some
Chardonnay greens. Chardonnay greens.
Yeah. Or they're not going to walk into Parliament with no shoes on.
Well, they might. Or if you look at the car marketing, because this is a marketing job. This is a really clever marketing job. I mean, and we need to sort of pull up our socks a bit here. The young guys go for the Corolla, the Toyota Corolla, save the Barra Reef, save the Koala, whatever, and they get the Corolla, and in comes the Lexus. It's market segmentation in marketing talk, and you say, okay, we'll shape and filter and refine our product and rebrand our product almost, Toyota, Lexus, to appeal to a slightly more sophisticated, perhaps older audience, and all of those seats were in places like Kooyong, Wallara, Brighton, places like that, upper middle class. So these people are, signalling to the world that they are considerate of the more sophisticated intellectual issues. They'll still ski in Colorado, but what the heck? And and they've got the vote. And it's now being argued by some that the Liberals will never get those votes back. That's how dramatic it's been.
Yeah, that's the claim. But I think that personally, I think that they will get those votes back. We will. It's hard to say. Essentially, those votes sit there in the political centre and they'll go for whoever they think's not going to disappoint.
So they found a home because they were frustrated with some of the issues that the Liberals weren't talking to?
Definitely. It was definitely a vote against major party. especially, we went through all of the policies in the major parties, and we saw how many of them were similar, right?
Yeah.
There was a basic similarity, and
Coles and
so
Woolworths.
if there's frustration out there, where do you vent that frustration?
Yep.
The majority of voters are politically centrist. They're not politically extreme, and most are actually quite ignorant about civics. So if you've got a party that comes along, they're at the political centre of gravity, and they say, we're going to be different than the big guys. The problem with them
It's
now...
fashionable. Someone said it was fashionable.
Exactly.
It's very fashionable. Let's
The
go.
problem they'll have now, though, is now they're in Parliament.
Oh,
Which means next time when you go to vote for them, you're not voting for someone who hasn't had an opportunity to do something. You're voting for someone who...
Okay, so we differ.
Hasn't
I
done
don't think they're going to be out very soon, quickly. You're saying your thesis is they won't deliver, they won't be able to deliver.
I don't think they'll be able... I think we're going to have essentially a Rob Oakeshott and Tony Windsor type of phenomenon
I remember
here.
that. I remember
Yeah, exactly, right?
They talk big.
They either help the major party do something, in which case they were invisible, major party takes credit,
okay, yep.
or they opposed it, and seeing they're going to be opposing Labor, they'll be opposing it from the right, which means they'll probably disappoint their voters in anything they disagree with. So,
Okay, interesting. All right, Nick, so what about your second takeout?
all right, my second takeout, who won this election? Who won?
Well, the Labor Party looks like they've got.
Yeah, but who really won?
Okay.
It's a Labor Greens coalition. So if we look in the Senate, in every state there's 6 seats available, Labor get 2, Greens get 1. And that's actually consistent across the board. There's they may be in 1 or 2 states, Labor will pick up 1 more. And then Labor and Greens between them might have just more than 50%. Labor doesn't have enough to rule without the Greens. It's essentially like Liberals and Nationals.
Well,
really,
they've now
except they're less
got a
aligned.
pincer movement because they've got the Labor and they've got the Greens on one side and the Teals on the other.
Yeah, exactly. And so we actually have a Labor Greens coalition. And I think for strategic purposes, if nothing else, we need to start calling it that. This is the Labor Greens government. That's what we have. It's not Labor. They got less than 1/3 of the vote, I think.
And in a pincer movement with the Teal Party. Because they will, by the way, Rebecca Sharkey was funded by, or aligned with, to be accurate, Climate 200. And Climate 200 were the guys supporting the other Teal candidates. So I would expect that Rebecca Sharkey will actually shuffle alongside. Just a projection. Don't know if that's
Simon
true.
Holmes, I call it. Well, here's another thing that we'll find out over the next 3 years. Will they actually form a party? It wouldn't be surprising.
Well, I think they
if
already have.
actually align and
Informally.
informally. Will they form one formally?
Well, they've certainly got the 1,500 members they need.
Yeah.
All right, and your third takeout point?
Yeah, look, my third takeout point, I guess, was at the last state election, the right-wing minor parties, we were interested to see, is there really a freedom vote? And the answer was no. The answer was there's 10 to 12% up for grabs for far right. They're not really far right, but you know what I mean. At that end of the political spectrum, that's about all there is up for grabs in the electorate, 10 to 12%. And so that's what we saw again.
Well, yeah, so it was disappointing in the state, right? And then we come to the federal and you think, gosh, people have really got a chance to do something. And
I thought maybe the eastern states, maybe there's something there that we don't have here.
But it didn't happen.
Not enough.
No UAPs, no One Nations, no nothing.
Yeah, and it might be, of course, that 6th Senate seat may end up going to them in some instances.
But Clive Palmer spent $100 million or something, you know, and there were candidates everywhere, UAP. There was a lot of yellow, you know, around the streets. And here we are, and people were frustrated. This is to me, my takeout. People are looking to vent their frustration, right? But they don't go away from the major parties. They did, actually, to be accurate, they moved away from the Liberal Party, and this is the big lesson for the Liberal Party. We'll talk about that going forward shortly, but they moved away from the Liberal. The preferences filtered and seeped. There was leakage, if you like, to other parties, and only then did the Labor Party with the Greens get up. But the Liberals were decimated, right? But the minor parties, the Freedom parties, the minor parties, nowhere.
Yeah, the Liberals still got more votes than any other single entity in the game, right? They did.
So how much better could they do?
And they could do better. And of course, you do expect kind of a swing against government, and it's been a bad term for them.
Yeah.
But also, they are uninspiring. Our federal Liberal Party is uninspiring. No, and you know exactly what I mean. Because they don't sell vision. This idea of going into a election and saying, this is what we offer, we'll do our job, you do yours, that doesn't win people. It sounds good, or it sounded good maybe 3 years ago, but since then we had bushfires, we had floods, we had coronavirus pandemic and all of the interventions in between, and that "we'll do our job, you do yours" was suddenly, hang on, when you do your job, our lives are significantly affected.
Well,
you need to have vision. You need to have.
I saw someone
more
saying
offer.
that Morrison went to the election with no communicating, no vision, saying just more of the same, right? And people were extremely disenfranchised with him.
Yeah.
There was a major drop-off in female vote for him. I mean, that alone would do it. But people, and the freedom movement, disappointed with him about mandates and so on. So here we go, and there's no vision. So people go, well, you know what? You've lost me. You've lost me. I'm going to vote maybe minor party, you know, UAP, One Nation, whatever, or GMP or whatever.
Yeah, or the most successful.
But I will vote a second minor party, and then I'll vote Labor. I'm not voting Liberal because you guys are really disappointing me.
Yeah.
And for the Liberal Party not to understand that is because we'll get to some comments shortly, because it doesn't seem they do. But that's what happened. And yet, if you're Albanese, you'd say, well, only 32 or 33% of the population actually chose me. So he'll have a bit of a insecurity problem, I think, when he gets back.
Well,
the next
yeah,
trip he
you
goes
would
on.
hope so. And that's what we said, that you know they're in coalition. And to the point you were just making, the most successful minor party in South Australia was the Marijuana Party. Like, the votes just went everywhere. From the Liberals. The Liberals still got more individually than any other party, but they went all over the place.
I don't think that slogan was "Let's blow up the joint." That wouldn't have been a good.
No.
Sorry.
But you just
Bad joke.
know there's no way that all the people who voted for it actually care about legalising marijuana.
No.
They just find it
But
funny.
the point there is that people are looking for a home, a safe harbour, so to speak, for their vote, and no vision from the leader of the Liberals. It doesn't matter who the Liberal leader is at the time, and it happened to be Morrison, but going forward, you know, we'll talk about it. They've got to communicate.
Yeah.
And John Anderson was talking to this, and he's saying, lamenting the lack of conversations and lamenting the lack of vision. He's saying, well, you know, we need to have these broader conversations and be projecting how we can go forward as a nation. And yet it's this political sort of tennis match, and it just doesn't. I mean, you know, it's frustrating. And people.
Where is the okay? We've had this tax system for X many years. We've discovered its weaknesses. These are the things. These are the big bold changes that need to be made. Where is the look? We've been digging ourselves deeper and deeper into debt. Maybe it's their fault. It's our fault. It's everyone's fault in different ways. Things came along we didn't predict. But here's the plan to actually dig our way out of debt.
Didn't hear that. We didn't
to
hear
actually
that.
solve that.
We didn't hear that.
No, you didn't hear that. I think
We got the matching
once,
policies that we talked about last time.
One time there was a policy that spoke about deregulation.
Yeah.
Like nothing about debt. Nothing about digging our way back.
Well, you said you weren't too surprised. Was there anything that surprised you?
The only thing
I got one.
really was the Teals were a little bit more successful than I thought. That was about all.
Well, when you dig into that, I think you start to understand why
It does also make sense.
They are in fact
but I
informed de
thought
facto
they were
party, and it's been well orchestrated. And I can tell you, it's brilliant marketing.
a lot of money.
And the takeout on that for me is that if the Conservatives in this country want to actually be a force and be represented in government, they're going to have to get a lot more intelligent and sophisticated and alert to what's really going on, because we're getting picked off at the pass at the moment.
Yeah.
And the takeout for me was that the two-party system is so strong. I mean, it's just it's in cement.
That's right. We're not really going to find our solution by breaking it down into smaller pieces.
It's a fractured alternative vote, which then finds its way back to a major party. And the complacency is there, the lack of vision is there, right? And the frustration remains with the people who...
For all of that protest vote, we still have the majority of seats, a Labor or Liberal, and one of them forms government.
But here's my real surprise. In the Senate in Queensland, Campbell Newman, ex-Premier, well-known, ex-Sky commentator, backed by the LDP, Liberal Democratic, there was a move on to independence. About 25 to 28% of people actually voted independent overall, apparently. Independent minor parties as an aggregate. He is a well-known person in that state. 2.4, I think it was at last count in the Senate, 2.4% of the vote, which is abysmal for someone of his calibre.
It'd be really interesting to get some decent analysis of why.
Even
was it media blackout? Because the Teals were so noisy in the media. And the media just loved them. They wanted to talk
Yeah, but
about
not so much in
That
Queensland.
wasn't the case with the independent
That was
minds.
more Sydney. Well, mind you, the Greens were very aggressive and they've done well in Queensland. But some people don't like Campbell Newman, but you know he is well known. 2.4. So if a guy like Campbell Newman can't score above 3. Let's call it 3%. What does that tell you? However, it has reset things, and as you say, it's a Greens-Labor coalition in effect, with the Teals pinching them on the side. Albanese will find it very difficult to get his policies through the lower house, let alone the upper house. So I don't know what that means for government in Australia. So but you know, the real takeout, the bottom line takeout, is the two-party system is locked in cement, and unless we've got a stronger strategy, we can't shift it. Okay, we'll now look at going forward. We've had the election, we're going forward. A lot of people are feeling very uncertain, Nick, very unstable even, and not sure about what this looks like for Australia. What's your takeout on that?
Well, I guess we can go through each of the parties. So what's Labor going to do? Labor's formed government. And so they're going to try and push their agenda, and we know what that looks like from the last time they were in charge and from Anthony Albanese's acceptance speech, which triggered, you know, ending the climate wars, as he said, and so we can expect that new bills relating to workplace industrial relations.
They always focus on AI.
Yeah, exactly, which will more of the Fair Work Act sort of thing. Will slow everything down, make life harder for employers, slow down the economy. We can expect to see more debt because government is doing more things in more ways, but not necessarily efficiently. And so I guess the broad picture to me is a bit bleak, but Labor is going to try and prosecute their case, doing so from a position of being in a minority and needing the Greens to support whatever they come
surrounded by a
with.
forest of green.
Exactly, a forest of Greens, and those who were Green just didn't call themselves that. What do the right-wing minor parties do? Now, my opinion is, if you want to be specifically libertarian, specifically nationalist, specifically this, specifically that, form a lobby. You can work in the lobbying space. But if you want to be a party, if you actually want to have a showing at all, you need to be able to pick up more than 10% of the vote to be real, to really exist. Otherwise, you are occasionally randomly winning seats, right? So,
well, it's too distributed over too many postcodes.
Yeah, exactly. You're not concentrated geographically. Like the Greens have this advantage. They're concentrated geographically. They're in the city centres.
Well, that's a really important point because the Teals are in those upper middle class seats. The Greens are in Fitzroy and places like that, although they've spread it out in Queensland a little bit. But they are focused, you know. It's a very targeted campaign. And the Freedom Party was like, freedom. You know,
they're everywhere. They're going for
5 trillion postcodes, and so you distribute your votes over those postcodes, and you get 3.4%.
You get nothing. Exactly. And so, in my opinion, look, my take on it will be one nation has the brand, Lib Democrats have the policies, and UAP has the money. If they could actually work together, they've got a big budget, they've got a coherent set of policies from people who understand civics and think about it, and they've got some good names. But they have to be willing to be a slightly broader tent.
Well, if you're
not entirely libertarian, not entirely nationalist.
If you look at South Australia, there was, you know, UAP, One Nation, GAP, you know, Freedom Party, whatever, and they all spent money to register. They all spent money on flyers. They all spent money on campaigns. They all spent money on call flutes. The dissipation of resource across 5 parties, all effectively saying the same thing, was extraordinary. And so, so my point there is that you're spreading your money over those geographies. You're spreading your money over your different parties, and you're up against a Teal kind of strategy with big dollars, right? And so your competition isn't the other Freedom guy. Your competition is those guys.
That's right.
So you've got to coalesce. You have to coalesce.
They have to. If they want to be a party, like if you want to be a lobby, you can be as small or as big as you want. But if you want to be a party, you need to be able to win more than 10% of the vote. I think they have to work together. They'll have difficulty with that because they don't all stand exactly for the same things.
They don't.
But they all stand against the same things.
And
that's what matters, right? They're wanting to prevent.
So we have a
Greens, Labor.
So we have a
common
enemy, and we need to come together. And so what we've got to see here is a coalescing of these minor parties' independence, because they're up against a force. They're up against Teals. They're up against the Greens. These guys are spending big money. They're well organised. They're choreographing their campaigns. And the alternative is splintering. And there's no such thing as a Christian vote, for example, because 18 to 20%, as we said previously, of the Christian vote apparently went to the Greens.
Yeah.
So you can't make these assumptions, and you can't say, oh, well, we're good, and the preferences will flow. See, this is the point. The preferences can't be guaranteed to flow. No. They might seep to Labor, or they might seep to Greens. And so your point is we need a common enemy. We need people to say, we may not agree on everything, but what we need to do is agree on who the enemy is. And that's more of a threat than our points of disagreement.
Yeah, I think that's right. To survive in our political system as a party, you need to represent a larger portion of the votership, which means having slightly broader range of beliefs.
Yeah.
And it does mean working with others. It has to, or it's just not going to work. There's been attempts to do this in the past. Always it's been a failure to pull everything together. And you need the money. And Clive Palmer just spending his money on his vanity project instead of putting it into something that's a going concern actually really irritates me. Like, I thought UAP have a very strange selection of policies. They're not, and everyone's a bit sceptical of, well, Clive Palmer, he's just paying everyone, you know, no one really is a believer. Whereas if he put his money into the Lib Dems, who have a set of, you know, coherent policies and names.
I don't agree with you on that, because I met some of the UAP people. They were very committed at the grassroots level.
I've met some, and I've also met some who were really just being paid to be there. And
okay, well, I can't comment on that. Okay, well, the people that I met were in for the real reasons.
Craig Kelly definitely was.
And they were good people, and they really had intent. And it's disappointing to see the result for them and for the country, because the frustration with the majors, and this is what we're talking about, I mean, why would anyone vote for the majors? And here we are, you know, the other takeout from this is perhaps this is the loss that the Liberal Party had to have from a point of renewal.
For me, that's the biggest thing going forward is what happens to the Liberal Party. Because you saw straight out of the gate with with losing the election, a number of moderates in the Liberal Party trying to fight their corner and saying we lost because we weren't moderate enough, and the evidence of that is that we lost.
And being quite aggressive too, you know, Simon Birmingham.
Being very aggressive about it.
And he was
Simon Birmingham, Matt Keane.
Yeah, Matt Keane out of New South Wales, who came out and said let's do more. And someone said, well, McDonald's doesn't sell health food. Was the Liberal Party going to start to sell progressive, you know, climate change stuff now? It's just not credible. The most disturbing comment I had, and I can't remember the woman's name, and probably that's a good thing, is a Liberal senator from New South Wales, I think she was, saying, we've had a difficult 2-3 years, very, very hard time. It's time to go back to our principles. I mean, right there is the reason they lost the election.
The party starts to think, well, our highest calling is to win an election. Yeah. Our highest calling is just to win.
It's transactional.
So when you lose an election, you say, well, what did everyone vote for instead of us? Well, let's be that. Then you're no longer an alternative. So after that, any wins that you get, you start getting narrower and narrower wins, and everyone, in fact, leaves you. They don't go to the opposition. They go everywhere.
And that's exactly what's happening.
Everywhere.
That's exactly what's happening. So that's saying that it's a transactional worldview, and principles are not principles. They're things that we can pick up or put down at will, and the people, and we don't have a vision. But hey, vote for us because we've got a nice colour. They are now. They had this disappointment at the polls, the Liberal Party. What do? Do they go left? Do they go right? Do they go centre? What do they embrace? What do they convey to people? And you could say, well, they are at a really, you know, it's the recession we had to have kind of comment that Keating made. It's the election we had to lose to reset things. Sorry to use that word, but reset things. And you say, okay, well, what do? So
here's
the moderates are calling to go more moderate.
But here's the point of hope. A lot of the moderates in the parliamentary party just lost. Because that's what the Teals did. They removed a whole lot of moderates. And so while that might be Simon Birmingham and Matt Keane and a few of those speaking very strongly and loudly as soon as they could out of the gate, they're also very aware of the reality. They've got less people in Parliament.
Yeah, Zimmerman and people like that. Yeah.
And so we may well see, if anything, that the Liberals actually, by virtue of who actually is in the Parliament now, shifts the other way. And of course, those of us who are conservative would be rather happy.
It's a very interesting time for the party and for the country, because we've been talking about Albanese and this type of parliament that's going to present itself as we go forward. There's going to be challenges on them delivering policy. If they don't deliver, and your point before about the Teals, they don't deliver, people will say, that didn't work, bad experiment, and they'll go back looking for an alternative, and they'll say, well, have you guys kind of had a little mea culpa and said, well, can we really do something that's valuable with vision and values and principles, and go back to the Menzies type of, a foundation and represent that to people? And so you say, well, can you? Yeah. Because that's what they need to do. In my opinion.
I completely agree with you. So this is the opportunity for the Liberals at the moment, is to present, for one, hold the government to account. The government's going to be a scattered mishmash of all sorts of negotiations.
That should be
hold them to account. Have a lot of discipline within the party. You don't have as broad a tent as you had a little while ago. Have a lot of discipline in the party to keep on message, and be willing to say the things that are traditionally seen as, political suicide when it comes to winning an election. Say we need to reduce debt. Say we need to make government smaller. Say, we shouldn't be throwing everything after climate change, especially given the geopolitics of where we are in the world, when the major emitters are our strategic enemies, and the major producers of the fuels that we need are all strategic enemies. Maybe it's not the time for us to be throwing everything away.
Well, John Anderson has some really good comments about our ability to affect the global, climate and what we actually, the pollution levels that we contribute to, et cetera, et cetera. He said it's just not real. It's just not credible. And we need to have. But as soon as you start to talk like that, people slap you down and say, oh, blah, blah, blah.
And so don't be media lackeys. It's so too easy for the Liberals to try and be media lackeys, to try and get that cycle.
Well, let's see if they can do it, because I can't say you weren't surprised. I can't say I'm too hopeful of that, but I hope it happens. But let's just bring this to a close and talk about some people, because there's been a few people that are sort of people highlights for me, and I'll lead off here, because Jacinta Price from the NT, Alice Springs, she's with CLP. She's got elected to the Senate, and she's a Conservative, and that's really good news. She's a strong person. She's got good, strong Conservative values, which she takes. And I heard her say she's not going to be speaking to Parliament. She's going to be in Parliament, right? I mean, she's going there to make her mark and make a difference, and I think that's just wonderful.
I think it's great as well. I think it's great, and in this ridiculous time that we live in, where if you're not a woman, you can't talk about women's issues, and if you're not Aboriginal, you can't talk about Aboriginal issues. Jacinta Price is going into a parliament that said they're going to be doing this voice from the heart, and she's a woman and an Aboriginal. She's got all of the category boxes that she can tick, all the she's got all the characteristics, so that she's got a right to talk about whatever she wants. The
other person that's of interest is George Christensen, who's obviously didn't get re-elected, and he's just announced that he's moving into full-time journalism, and he's actually going to try and hold these guys to account and be the voice from the media. I mean, he's got a journalistic background, so he's moving that way. And he's just made a major announcement about that.
And he's been writing on Substack and did his podcast about the pandemic, so he's been building up, I guess, that skill set and following. He's got his email lists, and so he's
come out. So that's another independent media kind of push, which is good to see. And my final one is Paul Murray, who came out and said the resistance starts here, and he counted the days down. He said we're going to count the days down for the next. So he'd go, "Whoa, it's on!" And it was really, really, encouraging to see, because some people felt Sky had left the building a bit, and this was at least saying, no, we've now got a Labor Greens government, but we're going to be holding them to account. So that was slightly
to see that there's some media who will actually do that to a Labor government, hold them to account.
Let's hope he does.
Feet to the fire. Let's see if that works.
So was there anybody else that sort of jumped off the page for you?
Well, something that I found interesting, this again was just thinking about who got into Parliament. This was a downer for me, was Andrew McLaughlin, right? Second Senate
from SA.
Second Senate seat from SA, and unfortunately our third Senate candidate, Karen Little, would have been very good to get into Parliament. She's not likely to. But Andrew McLaughlin, just the end of last year, speaking at a dinner, quotes Engels, right? Co-author of the Communist Manifesto, starts talking about we've got to face up to the fact that we need to reimagine capitalism and things like this. He's a Green. he's just one of the second.
Reimagine capitalism.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, we'll put those words on screen because that's going to be worth capturing and remembering.
Yeah.
And this is a liberal senator.
Exactly, and so this is just demonstrates to me the thing that we were just talking about, which I still think is one of the most important. The fight is the two-party system is locked in. It's the reality we live with. There is a fight which is to congeal the minor party vote and make sure the minor parties do actually well represent the voters who want them there. But within the major parties, inside them, there is a real fight on. And when you've got someone like Andrew McLaughlin getting that second Senate seat position to go up to Parliament again,
spruiking Marxism,
and he's quoting the co-author of the Communist Manifesto, and he's basically agreeing, going into a party that now has a Labor Greens majority, Parliament that now has a Labor Greens majority. It just shows you that within the major parties, there needs to be some real reckoning and holding people to account. It's not just about winning, it's about standing for the things that the people who voted for you want you to stand for.
And it's why you've got to do your homework when you're voting for someone. Know exactly who's funding them, what they stand for, what they're going to advance, and asking them the tough questions because they won't want to do it immediate things. So ask them face to face and understand if you can get to them. That's not always easy. Well, that brings us to the end of the session, and I guess the takeout, the overall takeout, is that we've been talking politics here and government in particular, because it's really more about government and policy and setting the direction. But politics is downstream from culture, and we have an Australian culture which really needs to find itself again, and people need to come together and actually collaborate and cooperate to get the outcomes that they want. And we can't just rely on a politician here, and Andrew McLaughlin or whomever. We have to be in this. We have to be talking to it. We have to be talking through media. We have to be contacting our members, having the conversations, and we have to be shaping and colouring and flavouring and influencing culture, because the politics will reflect, and that's the excuse they use. We're just doing what you guys want. Well, okay, what do we want? We don't want that. So politics downstream from culture. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.